At 11:42 p.m., Claire Bennett was standing beneath the white lights of St. Mary's emergency room when a woman covered in blood grabbed her wrist and whispered the 7 words that would destroy 18 years of marriage. "Please, call my husband. He'll come." Claire had heard those words many times before. In an emergency room, someone was always being called. A husband, a wife, a mother, a daughter. Someone was always about to hear a voice on the phone that would turn an ordinary night into a memory they would never escape. So Claire did what she had done for 15 years. She leaned closer, pulled a pen from her pocket, and asked the patient for the number. The woman's lips trembled as she whispered the first 3 digits. Claire wrote them down, then the next 3, then the final 4. And suddenly, the pen stopped moving. Claire knew that number. She had called it thousands of times. She had texted it grocery lists, school reminders, birthday plans, appointment updates, and late-night messages after difficult shifts. It was the number she had saved in her phone under one name, Daniel, her husband. For a moment, Claire told herself she had heard wrong. Emergency rooms were loud. Nurses were shouting orders. A monitor was beeping nearby. Rain was striking the ambulance bay doors. Maybe the woman had missed a digit. Maybe Claire's exhausted mind had rearranged the numbers into something familiar. So she asked again, trying to keep her voice steady. The patient repeated the number. Every digit was the same. Then the woman looked up at Claire with frightened eyes and whispered something worse. "Tell Daniel I'm sorry. Tell him I tried to wait for him." That was the moment Claire Bennett's life split into 2 parts. There was the life she had lived before that number, and the life that began after it. Before that number, Daniel Bennett was her husband of 18 years, a successful real estate consultant who worked late, traveled often, and always had a reason for being hard to reach. Before that number, Rachel Monroe was just another emergency patient. Another stranger rushed into St. Mary's after a violent car accident on a rainy road outside town. Before that number, Claire was only doing her job. But after Rachel whispered those 10 digits, Claire was no longer just a nurse in an emergency room. She was a wife standing beside a wounded woman who knew her husband's phone number by heart. And the terrible question was no longer whether Daniel had been hiding something. The question was how long Claire had been helping him hide it from herself. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because this is not just a story about cheating. It is a story about trust, denial, warning signs, friendship, family advice, professional duty, and the kind of truth that arrives when a person is least prepared to receive it. Claire Bennett had spent 15 years saving strangers. She knew how to read pain in a patient's eyes. She knew how to hear danger in a weak pulse and fear in a shaky voice. But in her own marriage, she had ignored signs she would have noticed immediately in anyone else's life. And that was what made the night Rachel Monroe arrived so painful. Claire had not been completely blind. She had been warned. Months before Rachel was brought into St. Mary's, Claire's best friend, Nicole Parker, had called her on a Saturday afternoon with a seriousness Claire did not like. Nicole was not dramatic by nature. She had been Claire's friend since nursing school, the kind of friend who knew when Claire was tired just from the sound of her breathing. So when Nicole called and said, "Claire, I need to tell you something, and I need you not to get angry before I finish," Claire immediately felt her body tense. Nicole explained that her younger sister, Ashley, had seen Daniel at a downtown hotel 2 nights earlier. He was not alone. According to Ashley, Daniel had walked through the lobby with a woman who was not Claire, his hand placed gently on the woman's back as they moved toward the elevators. Ashley had hesitated before telling Nicole, but the image bothered her too much to keep quiet. Claire's first reaction was not fear. It was defense. She told Nicole that Ashley must have seen someone who looked like Daniel, because Daniel would never humiliate her that way. Nicole tried to stay calm. She reminded Claire that Daniel had been taking more late-night calls, leaving town for long work trips, ignoring messages for hours, and returning home with explanations that sounded too polished. Nicole told her those things did not prove anything by themselves, but together they were enough to look into. Claire's voice hardened. She said Daniel had a demanding career and that successful men sometimes had complicated schedules. Nicole said she understood that, but hotel elevators and secret meetings were different. That was when Claire said the words that would later shame her. She told Nicole that maybe because she was still single, she saw danger in every marriage. The line went quiet. Nicole did not shout. That made it worse. She only said, "I hope I'm wrong." Claire ended the call angry, not because she believed Nicole, but because a small part of her remembered things she had been trying not to connect. Daniel had missed their anniversary dinner because of a sudden client emergency. He had taken 3 out-of-town trips in 1 month, yet shared very few details. He had started walking into another room to answer calls. Sometimes, he came home smelling like hotel soap instead of his usual cologne. There were evenings when he kissed Claire's forehead but not her lips, nights when he claimed exhaustion but stayed awake texting after she turned away. Claire pushed those thoughts aside because suspicion felt like betrayal. After 18 years of marriage, she believed loyalty meant defending Daniel, especially when the evidence was uncomfortable. Later that evening, Claire called her mother, Evelyn Carter, and told her what Nicole had said. Evelyn was a traditional woman who believed marriages should be protected from outside voices. She listened quietly, then told Claire not to allow a single friend to plant fear in her home. Evelyn said people who were not married often did not understand the pressures of marriage, work, business trips, and responsibility. She said successful men dealt with female clients, late meetings, hotel conferences, and phone calls at odd hours. She told Claire that not every strange situation meant betrayal, and that if Daniel had been a good husband for nearly 2 decades, Claire should not let rumor become poison. Claire wanted those words to comfort her, and they did. By the end of the call, she had convinced herself that Nicole was overreacting, Ashley was mistaken, and Daniel was simply under pressure. But the warning did not leave Claire. It only became easier to explain away. When Daniel said he had to fly to Chicago for a last-minute property meeting, Claire remembered Nicole's voice and forced herself to forget it. When he came home late and placed his phone screen down on the counter, she told herself he was protecting client information. When he missed dinner with their daughter Grace and apologized with flowers, she told herself guilt was not always proof of wrongdoing. When he started leaving the room to take calls, she told herself privacy was part of business. Claire was an emergency room nurse. She had built her career on noticing small changes: breathing, color, pulse, tone, hesitation. She could recognize danger in a stranger within seconds. But in her own home, she kept choosing trust because the truth would have cost too much to face. Claire and Daniel Bennett had once been the couple people admired. He was charming, well-spoken, and ambitious. She was disciplined, compassionate, and deeply respected at the hospital. They had one daughter, Grace, who was 17 and preparing for college. To people outside the family, the Bennetts looked stable. Their house was clean. Their photos were warm. Daniel still held Claire's hand at church events when others were watching. Claire still spoke of him with pride when neighbors asked about his work. But inside the marriage, silence had been growing for years. Daniel traveled more. Claire worked longer shifts. Their conversations became practical: bills, appointments, Grace's school, dinner, repairs, schedules. Love was still present, but it had become tired. Claire told herself this was normal after 18 years. She did not know Daniel was calling that distance permission. Daniel's talent was calmness. He did not look guilty because he rarely acted nervous. If Claire asked why he missed her call, he had an answer. If she asked why a trip had been extended, he had an email ready. If she asked why he seemed distant, he blamed pressure, age, money, clients, and the fear of slowing down. Daniel knew how to make his absence sound like sacrifice. He would say, "I'm doing this for us," and Claire, who understood sacrifice better than most people, would feel ashamed for questioning him. That was how he survived in her trust for so long. He did not need to create a perfect lie every day. He only needed to make Claire feel that doubting him was unfair. And because Claire was a woman who believed in marriage, she kept giving him the benefit of the doubt until the benefit became a blindfold. The night everything came out began like any other shift. Claire arrived at St. Mary's just before 7 p.m., tied her hair back, checked the patient board, and took over from a nurse who looked ready to collapse. Flu season had filled half the department. A construction accident had taken 2 trauma rooms. A teenager had come in with alcohol poisoning. An elderly man was waiting for a bed upstairs. Claire moved through the chaos with the steady focus that had made younger nurses admire her. She comforted a frightened mother, corrected a medication order, helped restrain a confused patient, and still remembered to call Grace during her short break. Daniel did not answer Claire's earlier text asking if he would be home late. She noticed, but she did not let herself think about it. There was always a reason. With Daniel, there was always a reason. At 11:37 p.m., the ambulance call came through. Female patient, late 30s, motor vehicle collision, significant bleeding, conscious but unstable, possible internal injuries. The doors opened 5 minutes later, and Rachel Monroe entered Claire's life on a stretcher. Rachel was beautiful in a fragile way, with rainwater in her hair, blood on her blouse, and terror in her eyes. She was trying to speak, but pain kept stealing her breath. Dr. Samuel Hayes moved beside the stretcher, giving instructions. Claire leaned close and told Rachel she was at St. Mary's, that they were going to help her, that she needed to stay with them. Rachel's hand found Claire's wrist and held it with surprising strength. Her lips trembled. She did not ask if she was dying. She did not ask about the car. She only said, "Please call my husband. He'll come." Claire asked for the number because that was part of the job. A nurse does not stop to wonder if a number will break her heart. Claire pulled a pen from her pocket, turned over a blank section of paper, and leaned closer. Rachel whispered the digits one by one. At first, Claire wrote automatically. Then her hand slowed. The first 3 numbers were familiar. The next 3 made her stomach tighten. By the final 4, she could no longer pretend. It was Daniel's number. Her Daniel. The man who was supposed to be home or at work or on some late client call. The man whose wife was standing beside a bleeding woman who called him husband. Claire looked at Rachel's face and asked her to repeat the number. Rachel did. Clearer this time. No confusion. No mistake. Then Rachel whispered, "Tell Daniel I'm sorry. Tell him I tried to wait." For a moment, Claire felt the entire emergency room move far away. The monitor beeps, the rushing footsteps, the doctor's orders, the rain outside the ambulance bay. Everything seemed to separate from her. But her training did what her heart could not. Her face remained controlled. Her hands moved. She handed information to another nurse, helped prepare Rachel for imaging, and answered Dr. Hayes when he asked for updates. Dr. Hayes noticed something. He had worked with Claire for years, and he knew the difference between professional focus and shock. He asked quietly if she was okay. Claire said yes, but her voice did not sound like her own. She stepped into the hallway with the number in her hand. Then she pulled out her phone and called the number Rachel had given her. Daniel answered on the 3rd ring. He answered the way he always answered when Claire called from work. Calm. Slightly tired. "Claire? Everything okay?" She said nothing at first. The sound of his voice in that moment was almost unbearable. This was the same voice that had said good night beside her in bed. The same voice that had told Grace he was proud of her. The same voice that had promised Evelyn he would always take care of Claire. Finally, Claire asked, "Daniel, do you know a woman named Rachel Monroe?" The silence that followed was not long, but it was complete. In marriage, silence can answer before words arrive. Daniel asked where she heard that name. Claire closed her eyes. She did not need him to say yes. His question had already said it. She told him Rachel was in the emergency room after a car accident. Daniel's breath changed. Then he said, "I'm coming." That was the second wound. Daniel did not ask Claire if she was all right. He did not ask how Rachel knew to give his number. He did not pretend not to know her. His first real reaction was urgency. He was coming. Not to explain. Not to protect his wife. To reach Rachel. Claire stood in the hallway holding the phone after he hung up and felt Nicole's voice return to her. Ashley saw him at a hotel. Look into the late trips. Look into the ghosting. Look into the long work assignments. Claire had called her jealous. Claire had called her insecure. Claire had defended Daniel with the confidence of a woman who thought marriage vows could protect her from evidence. Now a wounded stranger had repeated Daniel's number from memory, and Claire realized the rumor she rejected had not been rumor at all. It had been Mercy arriving early. Daniel arrived at St. Mary's 26 minutes later. Claire saw him before he saw her. He came through the automatic doors in a raincoat, face pale, hair damp, eyes searching the room with a fear Claire had not seen in years. It hurt that Rachel had brought that fear out of him. He looked like a man who had something to lose. When he finally saw Claire standing near the nurse's station, his steps slowed. For 1 second, husband and wife looked at each other across the emergency room, and neither of them spoke. Daniel's face carried 3 emotions in quick succession. Fear for Rachel, fear of Claire, and fear that the 2 lives he had kept separate had finally touched in the worst possible place. Claire did not move toward him. She only asked, "Is she your patient's emergency contact, or is she something else?" Daniel opened his mouth, but Dr. Hayes stepped out before he could answer. Rachel needed emergency surgery. Her condition had worsened. There was internal bleeding, and they needed consent if possible, but Rachel was fading in and out. Daniel asked if he could see her. Claire watched him say it, watched his eyes move toward the trauma room, and realized he had not looked at her that way in a long time. Not with desperation. Not with panic. Not with the kind of fear that makes a man forget how to hide. Daniel tried to say Claire's name, but she stopped him. She said, "Not here." Her voice was low. Not angry. Not loud. That made it colder. Then she turned back to the work because Rachel was still a patient. And whatever Rachel had been to Daniel, She was a human being fighting for her life. That was the hardest test of Claire Bennett's career. She had to help save the woman connected to her husband's betrayal. She had to check Rachel's vitals, respond to orders, prepare supplies, and keep her hands steady while her own marriage collapsed under the same hospital lights. Another nurse offered to take over, but Claire refused at first because duty was the only thing holding her together. Dr. Hayes eventually moved her to a different role, not because she was failing, but because he understood that professionalism did not mean a person had no heart. As Rachel was wheeled towards surgery, her eyes opened briefly. She saw Daniel near the hallway and tried to lift her hand. Daniel stepped forward before stopping himself. Claire saw it. That one movement confirmed what words had not yet explained. Rachel was not just a mistake. Rachel believed she belonged to him. While Rachel was in surgery, Daniel and Claire sat in a family consultation room that suddenly felt too small for 18 years of marriage. Daniel looked older than he had that morning. He started with the sentence guilty people often choose when they do not know how much is already known. Claire, it's complicated. Claire almost laughed, but there was no humor left in her. She asked one question. Did you tell her you were her husband? Daniel rubbed his hands together and said Rachel knew about Claire, but not everything clearly. Claire stared at him. That answer was worse than a lie because it tried to hide inside confusion. She asked again. Daniel admitted that he had told Rachel the marriage was ending. He said he had been unhappy. He said he felt alone. He said he never meant for anyone to get hurt. Claire listened and realized his apology was not remorse. It was damage control. Then Claire asked about the hotel. Daniel looked away. That was enough. Claire told him Nicole's sister had seen him months earlier. She told him Nicole had warned her, and she had defended him. Daniel whispered that he was sorry. Claire shook her head. Sorry felt too small. She had damaged a friendship defending his lie. She had called a woman jealous for telling her the truth. She had allowed her mother's advice to comfort her because it matched what she wanted to believe. Now Daniel sat across from her, offering explanations that could not reach the size of what he had taken. The worst part was not only that he had betrayed her. The worst part was that he had made her participate in her own deception by trusting him every time her instincts tried to wake her. At 2:18 a.m., Grace called. Claire looked at her daughter's name on the screen and felt another layer of pain open. Grace was 17, old enough to hear tension, old enough to ask questions, but young enough to still need her parents to be safe. Claire stepped into the hallway and answered. Grace asked if Dad was with her, because he was not home and he had not replied to her messages. Claire closed her eyes. She told Grace there had been an emergency at the hospital and that she would explain later. Grace asked if Daniel was okay. Claire looked through the glass at her husband sitting with his head in his hands and said, "He is here." Grace went quiet. Teenagers know when adults are hiding something. She asked if Claire was okay. For the first time that night, Claire almost broke. She said, "I'm trying to be." Rachel survived the surgery, but the night did not end. Before morning, Claire learned something else that made the situation more painful. Rachel was pregnant. The pregnancy was early, but real. No one said Daniel's name in that moment, but Claire felt it enter the room like a shadow she could not ignore. Daniel found out from the doctor after Rachel stabilized, and his face changed again. Not joy, not grief. Something closer to fear wrapped in responsibility. Claire saw it and understood that his betrayal had reached beyond romance, beyond hotel rooms, beyond secret calls. There might be a child. Another life pulled into the consequences of his choices. Rachel, who had seemed at first like the woman who destroyed Claire's marriage, now looked different. She was not innocent of everything, perhaps, but she had also been lied to. Daniel had made both women live inside stories designed for his comfort. Claire went home that morning and did not sleep. She stood in the kitchen as daylight entered the room and saw the house differently. Daniel's coffee mug was in the sink. His jacket was hanging by the door. A framed photo from their 15th anniversary sat on the counter near a bowl of fruit. It looked like evidence from a life she no longer trusted. Grace came downstairs in sweatpants, hair messy, face worried. She asked what happened. Claire wanted to protect her, but there are moments when protection becomes another form of lying. So she told Grace enough to be honest without making her carry every adult detail. She said Daniel had been involved with another woman, and that the woman had been in an accident. Grace stared at her mother, waiting for Claire to take it back. When Claire did not, Grace sat down slowly and began to cry. By noon, Nicole had called 3 times. Claire had ignored the first 2 because shame made the phone feel heavy. On the 3rd call, she answered. For a few seconds, neither woman spoke. Then Claire said, "You were right." Nicole did not say, "I told you." She did not sound satisfied. She sounded heartbroken. Claire apologized for what she had said, for calling her jealous, for using Nicole's singleness as a weapon because the truth had scared her. Nicole cried quietly and told Claire she had only wanted to protect her. That conversation hurt almost as much as Daniel's confession because it showed Claire another cost of denial. When we refuse truth, we often wound the people brave enough to bring it. Nicole had risked the friendship to warn her. Claire had defended the person betraying her and attacked the person trying to save her. Evelyn Carter arrived later that afternoon with food Claire did not want and advice Claire could no longer receive the same way. Her mother looked shaken. She had not meant to mislead her daughter. She had advised Claire based on what she believed about marriage, loyalty, and outside voices. But Claire was too tired to pretend the advice had not mattered. She told Evelyn that sometimes protecting marriage should not mean protecting a lie. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. She said she thought she was helping Claire avoid unnecessary suspicion. Claire said she understood, but suspicion had not been the enemy. Silence had. They sat together for a long time without speaking. For the first time, Evelyn did not tell Claire what a wife should do. She simply held her daughter's hand and said, "I am sorry." That apology did not fix anything, but it allowed Claire to breathe. Daniel came home that evening to a house that looked unchanged but no longer belonged to the same marriage. Grace stayed in her room. Claire sat at the dining table with her wedding ring placed in front of her. Daniel noticed it immediately. He looked frightened in a way that once might have softened her. He said Rachel had woken up briefly. He said she was asking for him. Claire did not respond. He said he knew he had made mistakes. Claire looked at him and said mistakes were things people made when they took the wrong exit or forgot a bill. What he had done was a life. A second life. A life with hotel rooms, long trips, late calls, and a woman who believed she had the right to call him husband. Daniel tried to explain loneliness again. Claire asked him if loneliness had forced him to lie to both women. He had no answer. In the days that followed, more truth came out in pieces. Daniel had met Rachel through a property deal almost 2 years earlier. At first, he said it was emotional. Then he admitted it had become physical. He told Rachel his marriage was over in every way except paperwork. He said Claire was cold, distant, and too consumed by work to care about him. To Claire, he had said work was stressful, clients were demanding, and travel was necessary. He had made himself the tired victim in both stories. With Rachel, he was the man trapped in a loveless marriage. With Claire, he was the husband sacrificing for the family. Both women had been given edited versions of his life. That was the kind of betrayal that made Claire feel foolish. Not because she had trusted him, but because he had used her trust as part of the cover. When Rachel was stable enough to speak, Claire went to see her. She did not go in uniform. She went as herself. Rachel looked smaller in the hospital bed, with bruises on her face and fear in her eyes. She had already learned that Claire was Daniel's wife, not his nearly ex-wife, not a cold legal attachment, not the woman he had described. Rachel began crying before Claire reached the chair. She said Daniel told her the marriage was ending. She said he told her Claire knew they were separated emotionally. She said he promised to leave after Grace graduated because he did not want to disrupt their daughter's final year of school. Claire listened carefully. Her pain did not disappear, but her anger shifted. Rachel had been wrong to accept half-answers, but Daniel had designed the half-answers. He had made betrayal look like a waiting season. Rachel told Claire she had been driving to meet Daniel the night of the accident. They had argued earlier because he had canceled another plan and said he needed more time. Rachel had told him she could not keep waiting in secret, especially with the pregnancy. She had been crying when she lost control on the wet road. Claire absorbed the words slowly. This was not only Daniel's betrayal of Claire. It was Daniel's pattern of delaying truth until other people carried the damage. Rachel apologized again and again. Claire did not comfort her like a friend, but she did not punish her either. She said, "You and I were told different lies by the same man." Rachel covered her face and sobbed. In that room, Claire understood something that would shape her healing. Rachel was not the wound. She was the alarm that finally exposed it. Daniel wanted reconciliation, but he wanted it too quickly. That became clear. He wanted family therapy before he had told the full truth. He wanted Claire to consider Grace before Claire had even processed her own heartbreak. He wanted credit for apologizing, as if confession after exposure was the same thing as honesty. Claire watched him carefully. In the emergency room, she had seen patients bargain with pain, promising anything if the pain would stop. Daniel was doing the same. He was not yet facing what he had done. He was trying to stop the consequences from spreading. Claire told him he needed to move out for a while. Daniel said that would confuse Grace. Claire said Grace was already confused because her father had taught the family to trust a life that was not real. Daniel packed a bag that night. Grace's grief came out as anger. She refused to answer Daniel's calls for several days. Then she sent him one message asking if Rachel's baby was his. Claire did not know Grace had heard enough to ask that question. Daniel called Claire immediately, panicked, asking what she had told their daughter. Claire said he should be more concerned with what his choices had told her. Grace eventually agreed to meet Daniel at a coffee shop, but she returned home quieter than before. She told Claire that Daniel cried. Claire asked what he said. Grace said, "He said he loves us." Claire nodded. Grace then said, "But if love can do this, I don't know what love means." That sentence hurt Claire deeply because Daniel's betrayal had not only damaged the marriage, it had damaged their daughter's sense of safety. Claire returned to work 2 weeks later because hospitals do not pause for broken hearts. The first night back, she hesitated before walking past the trauma room where Rachel had first grabbed her wrist. Dr. Hayes noticed, but said nothing. Nicole sent a message telling her she was proud of her. Evelyn called before the shift and said she loved her. Grace left a note in Claire's lunch bag that said, "You are stronger than you think." Claire cried in her car before entering the hospital, then wiped her face and went inside. That was the kind of strength people rarely praise because it is not dramatic from the outside. She did not feel powerful. She felt tired, embarrassed, and hollow. But she kept moving. Sometimes survival is not a speech. Sometimes it is putting on your badge and doing the next right thing. Rachel remained connected to St. Mary's for follow-up appointments, and each time Claire saw her name on the schedule, something inside her tightened. Claire arranged not to be Rachel's assigned nurse unless necessary, but she did not hate her. That surprised even Claire. Hate would have been easier. Hate gives pain a direction. But Claire's pain had many directions. Daniel, herself, Rachel, Nicole, her mother, the years of missed signs, the hotel rumor, the calls she ignored, the questions she swallowed. Eventually, Claire wrote Nicole a long letter. She thanked her for telling the truth. She apologized again for accusing her of jealousy. She admitted that she had used marriage as a shield, as if being married made her wiser than her single friend. Nicole accepted the apology, but their friendship changed. Not weaker, just more honest. The pregnancy became the part of the story no one could simplify. Rachel later confirmed that the baby was Daniel's. Claire received the news from Daniel in a quiet phone call. He sounded afraid, and for a moment, Claire heard the man she had loved beneath the damage he had caused. But she did not rescue him from the discomfort. She said the child deserved honesty, support, and peace, but that none of those things required Claire to remain his wife. Daniel said he never wanted to lose her. Claire answered that people often say that after building the very road that takes them away. She filed for separation first, then later divorce. Not because the decision was easy, but because staying would have required her to abandon the part of herself that had finally begun telling the truth. The divorce did not make Claire instantly free. It made her honest. There were lonely nights when she missed the old Daniel, or at least the version of him she thought was old Daniel. There were mornings she reached for her phone to send him a reminder before remembering it was no longer her job to manage his life. There were days she felt ashamed for not seeing it sooner, then angry at herself for taking responsibility for his deception. Therapy helped. Nicole helped. Grace helped in her own way, not by comforting Claire like an adult, but by living, studying, laughing again, and slowly allowing home to feel safe. Evelyn helped too, mostly by learning to listen without rushing to preserve appearances. Claire began understanding that healing was not a straight road. It was a series of choices to stop arguing with reality. 1 year later, Claire was still at St. Mary's, but she was different. Younger nurses came to her for guidance not only because she was skilled, but because she had a calm that had been tested. She became a mentor in the emergency department, teaching new nurses how to care for patients without losing themselves. She also began speaking quietly to women in her life about warning signs, not with bitterness, but with honesty. She told them that trust should not require blindness. She told them that marriage should not make a woman ashamed of her instincts. She told them that a friend who brings painful information is not always jealous. Sometimes she is standing outside the fire, trying to tell you she sees smoke. Claire did not become suspicious of every person. She simply stopped confusing loyalty with silence. Rachel gave birth to a son that winter. Claire did not visit the hospital room. She did not need to perform grace for anyone. But she sent a small blanket through Nicole, who knew someone on the maternity floor. There was no note except the baby's name, if Rachel chose to use it. Rachel later sent a message through Dr. Hayes thanking Claire. Claire did not respond immediately. Weeks later, she wrote back only one line: raise him in truth. That was enough. Rachel was not part of Claire's future, but she was part of the night that forced Claire into truth. Daniel tried several times to create conversations that sounded like regret and hope mixed together. Claire allowed conversations about Grace and the legal responsibilities connected to the baby, but not about returning. She had learned that forgiveness without boundaries could become another doorway to pain. The final time Daniel asked if they could start again, they were standing outside St. Mary's after a community health event. He looked older. The polished confidence had worn down. He said he had made the worst mistake of his life. Claire believed him. That surprised her. She believed he regretted it. She believed he missed her. She believed he understood more now than he had before. But belief did not create obligation. He said, "Is there any part of you that still loves me?" Claire looked at him for a long moment. The honest answer was yes. Some part of her probably always would. But love was no longer enough to rebuild what truth had exposed. She said, "I can love the man I thought you were and still walk away from the man you chose to become." Daniel cried quietly. Claire did not comfort him. That was not cruelty. It was freedom. For years, she had managed his moods, explained his absence, softened his failures, and defended his character against people who were trying to warn her. She would not manage the pain he had earned. She told him they could be respectful for Grace, and he should be present for his son, but she was no longer available to be the place he returned to after destroying the road home. Daniel nodded, but his face showed that he understood too late. Claire walked to her car without turning back. It was not a dramatic ending. No shouting. No public scene. No revenge. Just a woman who had finally learned that dignity sometimes looks like leaving quietly, even when the person behind you is crying. Claire Bennett's story became one people at St. Mary's spoke about carefully, not because she invited gossip, but because those who knew enough understood the strength it took to keep standing. She had saved the woman connected to her husband's betrayal. She had apologized to the friend she wronged. She had faced her mother's advice with honesty instead of resentment. She had protected Grace without burying the truth. She had allowed Rachel to become human in her mind instead of turning her into a single label. And most importantly, she had stopped blaming herself for trusting someone who had worked hard to be believed. That was the lesson Claire carried with her. Betrayal is not always missed because the signs are invisible. Sometimes it is missed because love keeps explaining them away. Years later, whenever Claire trained new nurses, she would tell them that emergency rooms reveal more than injuries. They reveal relationships. They reveal secrets. They reveal who answers the phone and who does not. They reveal the names people say when they are afraid. But Claire never told the full story unless she trusted the person listening. When she did, she always began the same way. She said there was a night when a patient asked her to call her husband, and the number belonged to Claire's own. People would ask what she did next. Claire would say she did her job. That answer always stayed in the room for a while. Because the most powerful part of the story was not Daniel's betrayal or Rachel's confession. It was that Claire did not allow their choices to decide who she would become. Nicole remained in Claire's life, though their friendship carried the scar of that first warning. One evening, almost 2 years after the hospital night, Claire and Nicole sat together on Claire's porch drinking tea. Claire told Nicole she sometimes still heard the exact way Rachel whispered Daniel's number. Nicole said she sometimes still remembered the way Claire accused her of jealousy. Claire apologized again. Nicole smiled sadly and said she had forgiven her, but she had also learned something. She had learned that truth-tellers often get punished before they are believed. Claire reached for her hand and said, "You loved me enough to risk being hated." Nicole said, "And you were scared enough to hate me for it." They both laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because healing sometimes allows people to tell the truth without bleeding from it. Evelyn changed too. She began telling younger women in the family that marriage needed wisdom, not blindness. It was not an easy change for her. She had spent decades believing that outside voices were dangerous to marriage, and sometimes they are. But she learned that silence can be dangerous too. She told Claire one Sunday afternoon that she regretted telling her to ignore Nicole. Claire said she had wanted to hear that advice, and Evelyn should not carry all the blame. That was another lesson Claire learned. People can advise you wrongly, but you are often drawn to the advice that protects what you are not ready to face. Evelyn's words had comforted her because they allowed her to keep the life she wanted. Nicole's words had hurt because they threatened to reveal the life she actually had. Grace eventually went to college, carrying a more complicated understanding of love than Claire ever wanted for her. But she also carried strength. Before leaving, Grace told Claire that watching her walk away from Daniel had taught her something important. She said, You showed me that forgiveness does not mean staying." Claire held her daughter and cried because that was the lesson she hoped Grace would never need, but was grateful she understood. Daniel remained in Grace's life, though the relationship took time to rebuild. He became quieter, less certain of himself, more careful with promises. Whether that was true change or regret settling into his bones, Claire no longer made it her responsibility to decide. That was between Daniel, his children, and the truth he would have to live with. Claire never remarried quickly. People asked. Some hinted. Some told her she was still beautiful, still young enough, still deserving. Claire knew they meant well, but she was not in a hurry to fill the space Daniel left. For the first time in many years, her life belonged completely to her. She worked. She rested. She went to dinner with Nicole. She visited Grace at school. She took Evelyn to doctor's appointments. She sat alone without feeling abandoned. She learned that loneliness after truth was different from loneliness inside a lie. One was painful but clean. The other slowly made a person doubt herself. Claire preferred the clean pain. It gave her room to heal. It gave her room to hear her own instincts again. It gave her room to become someone she respected. And Rachel, the woman on the stretcher, became a reminder Claire never expected to feel grateful for. Not grateful for the betrayal. Not grateful for the humiliation. But grateful that truth had finally arrived in a form Daniel could not explain away. If Rachel had not crashed that night, Claire might have continued defending him. She might have continued believing Nicole was wrong, Evelyn was wise, Daniel was busy, and her own discomfort was insecurity. She might have spent more years sleeping beside a man living somewhere else in his heart. Instead, the truth entered through ambulance doors, wounded and bleeding, asking for Daniel. That was the terrible mercy of the night. It hurt Claire deeply, but it ended the guessing. Sometimes the truth does not arrive gently. Sometimes it arrives in a hospital bed and says the number out loud. In the end, Daniel Bennett did not lose his marriage because Rachel gave Claire his number. He lost his marriage because he had built a life where that number could be given. Rachel did not destroy Claire's trust. She exposed where Daniel had already broken it. Nicole did not damage Claire's peace. She tried to warn her before the truth became an emergency. Evelyn did not mean to mislead her daughter. She simply protected an old idea of marriage that did not leave enough room for a woman's instinct. And Claire did not fail because she trusted her husband. Trust is not failure. The failure belonged to the person who used that trust as cover. That distinction became important to Claire's healing. She stopped asking why she had not known sooner and started asking what she would do now that she knew. So if there is one image that explains Claire Bennett's story, it is not Daniel in the hotel lobby, or Rachel on the stretcher, or the phone ringing in the hospital hallway. It is Claire standing under the emergency room lights, holding a number in her hand, realizing that her past was rearranging itself digit by digit. Every late trip, every unanswered text, every strange explanation, every warning she rejected, every defense she made on Daniel's behalf. All of it came together in that moment. And still, she stayed standing. She did her job. She protected her daughter. She apologized to her friend. She faced her mother. She confronted her husband. She walked away. That is why Claire's story is not only about betrayal. It is about the strength required to accept a truth you once fought against. Now the question is yours. If your best friend warned you that your husband might be cheating, but your mother told you not to listen, who would you believe? And if you were Claire, standing in the emergency room with a patient begging you to call her husband, only to realize the number belonged to your own, what would you do next? Would you still help save the woman? Would you confront your husband immediately? Would you forgive him? Or would you walk away and rebuild your life in silence? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if this story reminded you that sometimes the truth comes from the person we least want to hear, subscribe to Prime Tales Hub for more emotional, true life-inspired stories about betrayal, family secrets, healing, and the quiet strength it takes to choose yourself. Now the question is yours. If your best friend warned you that your husband might be cheating, but your mother told you not to listen, who would you believe? And if you were Claire, standing in the emergency room with a patient begging you to call her husband, only to realize the number belonged to your own, what would you do next? Would you still help save the woman? Would you confront your husband immediately? Would you forgive him? Or would you walk away and rebuild your life in silence? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if this story reminded you that sometimes the truth comes from the person we least want to hear, subscribe to Prime Tales Hub for more emotional, true life-inspired stories about betrayal, family secrets, healing, and the quiet strength it takes to choose yourself.